Shu.
Hello.
And Councilmember Carson.
Here.
Also here. And then Councilmember Forrester Rothbard sent a message that he's on his way, but will be running late, so we'll get started. And we did have a request today for a comment, and we don't have that on our agenda, so why don't we go ahead and we can, take some time now for.
I'll try to keep it.
I
I'll try
think
to
we've
keep
only
it
got
short.
one from the public who would like to speak, but if there's anybody else from the public present who would like to speak, we will
I don't
listen
wanna make
as
a
well.
practice of this.
Yeah.
I'll keep it short.
Yep, 3 minutes would be great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I appreciate, the committee for what they're doing. I appreciate Len Carson. When the vote was taken on that first budget, that vote went down. That was very dramatic. I'm not so sure that has ever happened too many times.
Just real quick for the record, can you just introduce yourself?
William Shu,
Thank you.
14 Parish
I
Avenue.
appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a great street. We have great neighbors, fantastic people. I think there were 4 council people that voted no. There were 7 council people at the time. Forrester Rothbard wasn't on that council at the time, on the council. So the vote was 4-3, and it was my understanding, and I assume that other council people, that there was an agreement, not written, but a budget review committee would be established. It's my own opinion that if that hadn't happened, I think the budget would have failed the second time. That's hard to say, but I believe it's just my opinion, that unless the budget committee was established, it probably would have gone down in flames. And then, I don't know what would happen. It wouldn't sound good. I read the column in the paper, it said, and there was an agreement of both parties, or all 3 of them, that within 5 years, without major changes, the city's fund balance would be depleted. I'm not an expert. All I did was say, okay, I see it, I think they agree on it. So I thought about 7 things that might help out. And I'll go over them. I don't expect you to have questions. I can give each person a copy of what I'm just gonna say. The first one is, it deals with the fund balance. Now keep in mind, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an accountant, nor am I a finance director. I'm just looking at this. Immediately vote to restrict the amount of money that can be used from the fund balance. Actually put a very restrictive dollar cap amount on that money that can be taken from that fund balance. In addition, you couple this with a more restrictive process of taking money out of that fund balance. This one, I thought long and hard. I looked at some municipalities, and I said, before July 1, 2025, establish by vote of the council the percent in real property tax for the 2026 budget. In other words, is it gonna be 3.5, is it gonna be 5.71, is it gonna be 0? And that movement, that actual vote, would create an atmosphere that would mandate basically to balance the 2026 budget. Just that percent. Now that's in my own mind. Keep in mind, I'm not an expert. The third one was any current suggested projects and expenditures, including any matching funds for any grant which was not budgeted in the 2025 budget, should not be funded unless it has a justifiable emergency. Let me give you an example, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Actually, I'm gonna ask you to wrap it up, and if you have something, in writing, you can provide it, but
Right.
we're already approaching 3 minutes, okay?
How much time?
We're at 3.
About 3.
Yep.
I have 3 more things.
No, we're already at 3 minutes, so if you want, you can submit it to us in writing so that we can review it, okay? Thank you. All right. So next, we have our acceptance of minutes. Did everybody have a chance to look at the March minutes?
I feel like I did, but let me just
Okay.
run back over them.
Yep. Oh yeah, they're attached here too. Any comments, feedback? Does everybody accept them?
Nope, looks good.
Alright, okay, so minutes are accepted, thank you. Alright, and our sole topic, which we found our topics can take quite a lot of our discussion, is coming up. We have the police department. I do wanna, just real quick, before we get started, and invite Chief Witzenberg up to speak. I saw in the Daily Star recently, there was a highlight about the Budget Review Committee. I don't know if anybody saw it in, it was the April 11th edition of the Daily Star. They noted that, in the editorial, they said, closer to home, Oneonta's Budget Review Committee appears to be making a more pragmatic approach as it addresses a $1.68 million deficit in the city's budget. The Common Council Subcommittee, which was created after a contentious 2025 budget vote, intends to identify potential areas for cost savings and revenue generation. The three members aren't going through the city budget line by line. Perhaps that will come later, but they are starting with talking to department heads individually about spending. Beginning with a more holistic approach seems like a logical first step in a process that likely won't see short-term results. So I just wanted to, note that we had a shout out in the Daily Star, and also I do want to look at our committee charge too, because I see that they got our charge they got a little bit correct, but I just wanted to go back to our committee charge. Says the purpose of the committee is to review the current budget to determine specific opportunities for savings in 2026 and, if applicable, in 2025. There should be no expectation that this committee balances the budget through proposed cost reductions, but rather that it identifies such potential savings that the requirement for added funding is reduced proportionally. Okay, so I just wanted to go over that because thank you, for the shout out there, and also just making sure that we all and the public have a good understanding of what we're doing here today. And now our sole topic for tonight, the reviewing services provided by the police department. And thank you very much, Chief Witzenberg, for providing us the report ahead of time. I don't know if folks had a chance to check that out, but I think it was attached here too for us. So thanks. You want to take it away?
Would you like me to read directly from that as far as the questioning goes, or is there questions that you might have for me that I could take some time to answer?
Do folks have any questions to start off with? I know I glanced through this, but I don't have any questions developed yet.
No, I think it's a nebulous idea. Obviously, we know that public safety is the largest portion of our budget. So, but there's also balancing that with the fact that no one wants to cut public safety. I think at every turn we've sort of said no, let's invest in that. So, I think the only option that I see is to think, and I know that this is where you live, is thinking outside the box in terms of operational efficiencies to be able to provide services without increasing the budget. So that's, I guess, just every time I hear you speak, I am learning more about the department, and I appreciate that. But I'm not an expert, obviously, on what you do, and so I wouldn't sit here and say, here's what I think you need to do. But I think that, just hearing from you, what you think and what you're up against is always helpful in terms of making tough decisions.
So we have 3 in the academy right now, which would put us at 24.
Okay.
But they won't be ready for solo assignment until December. We have 17 currently signed up for the test that's going to be given in May. So that may put us in a position we might be able to hire staff. We have a retirement coming up June 28th, so that's going to drop us by 1. There is potential for us to maybe be able to hire into that position in the interim. There are some logistical problems with the test being offered now twice a year with the academy schedules, the way that they are. The start date for some of the academies may not coincide with the ability for us to hire staff.
Okay.
That said, we can either stagger hiring, we can delay hiring, we can send them to an academy later. We have a year before we actually have to send them to school.
Okay.
So there are some options open as far as hiring of those staff. This puts us in a pretty good position overall. This would tie us with the bottom as far as lowest staff per capita agency in the state. And once we hit that benchmark, all of the department, matter of fact, I just saw an interesting ad this morning. This police department in Australia is hiring international candidates because they're so desperate for hiring. This is apparently not just a national issue, but an international one, which I found to be pretty amusing. I'm sure you can look it up. There's a police chief that's standing with a nice water background and a sign falls and he's in shorts in the water. So,
Are you thinking about it?
I was gonna say, a little bit.
Because
Maybe.
that sounds
it
tempting.
looks like a really good place to work.
Don't like
She's hanging
that.
out on the beach in shorts, it's great.
We can't compete with
You know, we've had some
I know.
interesting developments. One of the things that I've been trying to do is reduce attrition overall. One of the things that I have really stressed for my sergeants and my dispatchers is prioritizing calls for service on things that can wait so that we're not sending officers rapid fire one after the other. Give them a break, give them a little bit of time to breathe, come back to the station, do their work. If it can be handled in a phone call, let's try to do that, right? It wasn't working.
Okay.
They felt that need that they had to get to the call. So ultimately what I did is I doubled them up. I put them in the same car, so now they have to wait. And we found some interesting things with that. I think I noted in the report, 2 years ago, from 2 years ago, we're 25% down on fuel costs. For this year compared to last year, it's a 27% decrease from August until April. It's going to be interesting to see how that looks going forward. This is a relatively new experiment for me. A few things that we've seen is a reduction in uses of force. We have 2 officers show up on scene. People are less likely, I think, to maybe give that officer a hard time.
Definitely.
Yeah, so we haven't had as many officers having workers' comp related injuries, comparatively, I don't think. I have to look at that. We have relatively few for the size of the department, and it would be something that we really have to look at and spread over time. But there are some interesting things that look like they're coming out of it. Decreased routine maintenance seems to be one for the vehicles. So that could be promising, a promising avenue for us. The problem there is it's not really an efficient way to police, but it seems to be safer. So that's pretty well documented overall throughout departments. It's not just Oneonta. It's one of the reasons why I adopted the model for the time being, because safety is my primary concern. Because if we had an officer go out on injury, then we're backfilling with overtime at a very large rate, which is where most of the overtime budget comes from, is minimum shift staffing. So in an attempt to try to curtail some of the overtime usage, reducing injuries is really part of that.
Could you give us an example of some of the types of calls that you've tried to kind of pause before responding to?
Yeah, like a past property damage
Okay.
crime that there's no witnesses for.
Okay.
Like if somebody's on the phone and says somebody broke the slab off of my fence, we don't have to rush to that.
Right.
Do you have cameras? No, I don't have any cameras, so there's not an imminent threat of life or property at that point, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
We would handle, obviously, accidents, calls related to mental health would be put higher on the priority list, family disputes, assaults, active crimes in progress, that kind of thing would still be at the top. But things like, a slashed tire that nobody saw anybody do, or litter on somebody's yard, we may not take care of right away, or if it's a noise complaint and we're out with the call, we're not gonna break away from that to go and handle the noise complaint. It might take a little while for us to
Okay.
get there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thoughts, questions?
I have questions.
Yeah, oh, go for it. Yeah.
Chris, can you help the committee by walking us through what it looks like from your suggestion and then you implemented with reducing the dispatchers? You started at midnight and you had talked to I think the council at whole about if it's successful, then you might expand upon that.
We
Where
may-
are you at in this project, and
right
what kind
now-
of cost have you, what kind of cost savings have you seen from that?
I don't know if we've necessarily seen any costs. What we have done is we've been able to establish 3 people on the road without filling that position. So I have another police officer on the street for public safety, as opposed to having a dispatcher that's in the station that can't be out with eyes on the streets. That was the primary goal there. If I didn't eliminate that position, what happens is that has such a high attrition rate on that shift. I think we've interviewed dozens of people
It says
for,
15, it says in 3.
yeah, or over a dozen people for that position. I think we've hired, I think we may have hired that many dispatchers.
It says in just 2 years, we have interviewed and conducted background investigations on 15 people to retain 2 full-time and 1 part-time
Does it
dispatcher.
say how many we've hired? Okay. Yeah, so over the last 5 or 6 years, I think we've hired that many. It's a very different, it's a very time-consuming position to fill for, because every single one of those positions requires a background investigation.
Sure.
So with handing off the 911 calls for service, which were about 330 total calls per year, so roughly 10 a day, right? Some days none, some days more than others. We were paying a full-time salary for somebody to sit in the police station.
Right, so there was a cost savings there.
But,
You're
Eliminating
saying by
that-
putting the officer out, it costs more money?
no,
Okay,
eliminating that position allowed me to instead have an officer backfill the dispatch position and have an officer sit at the desk. I can now close the station and put them out on the road.
okay, so you took the money from the dispatcher and put it towards an officer?
Essentially, yeah, essentially.
Okay. And is that the thought process moving forward?
Well, you know, they do a lot of administrative duties, as far as like shuffling paperwork and checking for warrants and helping officers get the stuff that they need so that they can get through an arrest. I don't know if eliminating those civilian positions for both shifts, is a great idea right now. I think there is some logistical challenges with the county. I think for sure there's a bit of a disconnect between, their primary business, which is, dispatching the state police and sheriff's department, as opposed to our dispatchers, which do a little bit more, getting background information,
Right.
and searching our in-house system for maybe like potential flags. Like, this is a place that we've been to before, they may have problems. So I'm hesitant at this point, given the call volume, to hand off, more than 30% of our overall call volume to the county from 412s, and especially from the day shift. Now, a lot of the calls from day shift are business related. I have a meeting with Robert O'Brien tomorrow from the county, related to not only the dispatch portion of this, but CAD, which is a computer-aided dispatch and report management system, as well as the radio infrastructure project that we're trying to work on. There's been some vendor issues with the company that we've been using. They've had some conflicts, and I'm trying to figure out where exactly those are. But it's a big project, and I'd like to see it done correctly. The fire chief and I spoke a bit about it today, as well as the assistant fire chief. And I. So the 3 of us, the assistant fire chief, the lieutenant, and I are going up to see him tomorrow.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, in follow-up to that, and based on, it says here that in your response, that the capacity for proactive services is in the highest demand. And I know that we've talked a lot over the last few years about the administrative burden of some of the recent legislation, not so recent now. And so I think that outsourcing the dispatch to the county is a really great example of a way that we can take some of the like you said, like looking into potential like sites where you might be responding and things like that, like taking some of those things off of the station. Are there any other, and so one of the things that you said is what made me think of this, and then kind of as you were talking, I was thinking like, about doing background checks for civilians, is that something that's done in-house? And really what I'm getting at is, are there things that are taking a lot of time and effort administratively that could be theoretically like third-party contracted out, like background checks or something I don't know about?
There's an old saying, if you want something done right, do it yourself.
Totally.
I'm very hesitant to outsource background investigations to anybody else.
Okay.
Some of them we do already. We use a vendor system called Guardian Alliance, which
Okay.
is they do like the personal history questionnaires. We don't do psychologicals and fingerprinting on all of the employees.
Okay.
But we do fingerprinting on people that have basically unfettered access to the confines of the building.
Okay.
And even that, I mean, we don't do a personal history questionnaire, but for dispatcher, we would do basically what amounts to a police officer's background investigation without the home visits.
Okay.
So it's abridged. You know, we have tried to make that as efficient as possible. And even, I mean, I think we've cut back, I think we've clawed back about 10 hours or more per investigation using Guardian Alliance.
Okay.
So rather than, taking 40 hours to do, they're taking between 20 and 30. But
Wow,
it's
40 hours?
spread out over time, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's only 3 people that are really doing the investigation, sometimes 4.
Wow.
And when you're hiring 4 people, it could shut down the detective. It would take up a good bulk of the detective division's time for a month, maybe 2.
Wow. I mean, that seems like something, like I know that there are organizations out there that's what they do. And so you think that that's not a viable way to reduce administrative burden? Okay.
I mean, if you gave me some ideas of who you'd be looking at, I would look into that.
Okay.
As far as the cost goes, yeah, it's cost savings. I don't know if I'm comfortable with
There's a
that.
risk. Okay. Are there any other administrative areas where you feel like possibly there are like reputable organizations out there that could take some of the archiving? I don't know, I'm just thinking about paper, like anywhere your officers are touching paper instead of people, is there anywhere where we
You know,
could?
matter of fact, the city administrator and I just spoke about this the other day. There's been some push to adopt AI for report management and report writing.
Whoa,
I have some problems with that too, because it really hasn't been tested in the courts, and I'm
okay,
not gonna be the spearhead for that. We'll let
That's
somebody
fair.
else fall on their face and see what happens. And if it's a success, then we ride near success, and if not, we wait. But at this point, a lot of the administrative paperwork that the police officers have are a result of them being either a direct witness or having to collect direct witness testimony in order to provide that to the court.
okay,
So, no, not really. I mean, we're talking about all first-party knowledge stuff and investigative material, so, unless you're gonna privatize the police force and go with a private police agency, I don't see that happening.
okay. So my second question is about the building.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not ideal for your operations, for neither you nor the fire department, sharing the space, like potentially if you had the whole thing or they had the whole thing, but, so talk to us about potential other, talk to us about that.
So I'm mixed on the building, and I think that the fire chief and the assistant fire chief maybe have a bit of a different perspective on the space demands, and I'm not saying that we don't have space demands. I think the bigger issue for me is the use of space and how it is that we can manage that and create more within the framework of the building.
Okay, you feel like that's possible?
Well, I'd like to consider myself a bit of a fiscal conservative.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a full-fledged building project's a lot of money. But I think that there is some room for expansion within the footprint that currently exists.
Okay.
We've been working on a building survey to make some determinations as to whether or not that's viable or not. It's really gonna boil down to what the condition of the underlying building is. Is it viable for us to expand on the existing footprint? If it's not, and I'm not an engineer, so it's very, I can give you my own opinions on things, but I just don't have the facts. We have no overflow space, and I have an aging dispatch area, which is really what kicked off this whole discussion, because in order for me, and Carrie worked there years ago, we really had nothing done to it except patching, issues that come up. And at some point, we have to move into the 21st century, and the building is a 19th century concrete and mortar building, or brick and mortar building. I have some personal concerns about like the breaker boxes. Actually, I've never known a breaker in the building to go, so I don't know if they actually work.
Or they're
We
great,
haven't had a fire
or they're
here,
like
so
the
I
best.
guess but we have valuable equipment that rests inside the building, a lot of computer equipment and a lot of electronic equipment. And, you know, that to me is something that I want to keep an eye on because it's my responsibility. There are no easy ways to renovate anything there. Everything is used 24 hours a day, the dispatch area especially. And we would have to do something to relocate it in another space. The problem is it's also our welcome area. So how does that look, right? It's a complicated discussion. It doesn't just involve me, and it's certainly something that I would like to get the seed to be planted as to how we might be able to deal with that. There's a lot of open and unoccupied space in the building. The foyer, for instance, is an abyss of open space that hasn't been used. So making that into a 1-2 story area and maybe moving some things around for the courts would help. I don't know if that would solve the problem, but it would certainly give us the bulk of the first floor and second floor to open up for public safety.
If you weren't located in the existing building, where do you think would be a feasible city property for police operations?
You know, I don't know if we split the police and fire department up, it might be quite a bit easier to make that determination. I'd really have to look to see what the square footage demands would be. Again, I'm not an architect or an engineer.
Yeah.
Courts have a very fixed size as far as how many people per square feet and how big an office has to be.
Okay.
And we're like
That's
way
good to
under
know.
that. Like the courts require, I think, like 110 or 120 square feet per person per office. And I think we've got somewhere around like 70, we have closets.
When we were there for the tour, they were already saying that they wanted more space.
Yeah, the court?
The court, yeah.
That's wild to me.
Yeah.
That they
Okay.
were, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but, you know, we'd have to go back to that, but they
Yeah.
were saying that they wanted more space and there's potential they wanted even more.
Wow.
So,
Right, I mean, and that's the other option, right, is theoretically putting the court in a different, because we have to provide them
We have,
with the
yes,
space.
we have to provide
But it
that.
doesn't necessarily have to be in that building, does it? I mean, we have a contract right now, but
Can I add something?
yeah.
just that they offset the cost
When
of
we-
maintenance.
When we met with the court for about their space, we talked about putting them in a different location and they said no.
Well, that's not really up to them though.
Well, they said that according to state regulations, they have to be in certain areas. And so when we were exploring different.
What does that mean, certain areas?
Certain types of buildings, for example, we asked about all the state buildings up
Yeah.
at SUNY because it's already a state building,
Okay.
if they could be housed there, and they said no. And then we talked about possibly going over where OPT was going to be leaving,
Okay.
and they said no. So we explored different ideas with them as far as the relocation of the rooms.
Do we know what they're looking, I mean, is it the proximity to the police station, do we know,
That,
or?
I didn't get
Not
into
clear.
that
Okay.
part of it.
Right.
I don't know.
So we're kind of unsure about the court needs and what they will tell us they need from our
Well, they've
contract,
Perimeters,
is what it
apparently.
sounds like.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we're not really familiar with what those parameters are, but
Right.
we know that alternative locations have been denied.
Yeah, and we've been, the police and fire have been together for the history of the city with the courts. And at one point, City Hall was 242 Main Street. And then they split, City Hall came here and we went to the public safety building. And that building was kind of shoehorned in to fit available space in the lot. It's looking at blueprints, it's an awkwardly shaped lot, that creates some issues. Personally, I like the building. I just wish there was more flexibility within the building to be able to get projects done, which there are none. And, you know, again, that's the problem, is it's a brick and mortar building, so anything you try to do is disruptive.
Right.
When I was looking through reviewing the budget, I saw a note that there's an assessment underway, a report for the building. It says early 2025.
Yep.
I do not know where that's at in time.
I'm not certain either, I can check with Chris and
Yeah.
the engineer that's doing that. I thought it was, first or second quarter, or in the second quarter.
And so there's like 50,000 in this year's budget. Do I remember that correctly? For the needs assessment
Needs assessment for the building?
for the building, if I remember.
Yeah, I think that's been
Yeah.
rolled over from last year. The project there is, we've had several, site visits with the engineer. I don't know where he is with that report. I have not heard from him recently. I think they're about a month ago. They met with Chris and the fire chief. My lieutenant met with them, but I was sick, so I don't have an update on that meeting. I don't think there was anything brought up really, except, I don't remember anything groundbreaking coming out of that meeting.
Okay,
Nothing of note.
I'm partly asking in the context of the budget because do you anticipate that after that needs assessment that the city's gonna wanna move ahead or to do stuff on the Plug Safety Building next year?
To be clear, I'm looking at this from a generational standpoint. I recognize that these projects sometimes take 20 or 30 years to accomplish,
Mhm.
okay? If we're not thinking about this now, we're putting ourselves in a disadvantage, and I don't think that that's a place where we wanna be. We're recognizing that we have issues. My dispatch area will not make it 20 years. It might make it 10. So having these conversations now is very important. And, you know, how that's going to look over time, I don't know. But once that report comes back, I think it'll shed some light on the challenges that we have there. We've gone through every existing space within the building. And there's a lot of wasted space there, but it is not conducive to human habitation for sure.
When you say the dispatch area, do you mean the physical space or
Right.
the hardware that's housed within the physical space?
Well, that's part of it too. If you were able to get up in the ceiling of the building and look through the mass of abandoned wiring that's been put up through there, you
Nice.
see it's super complicated. I think you might have come through when we did the tour and saw some of the stuff like this
Yeah,
hanging
I
there.
was gonna say, you don't even have to get up into it.
No, you can see it,
You can
like-
just stand underneath one of the missing panels and
It looks
look up,
so
right?
much better when you put your head up in the ceiling.
But, yeah.
There's clearly some issues
Peeking
that
through.
have to be addressed, and within the confines of the dispatch area, that's our most electronic-heavy center of the building. There's a raised floor in there so that we can run cabling underneath the floor. The
Yep.
raised floor is worn out in some spots, the tiles kind of tilt back and forth. You know, before we have a problem where somebody falls through the raised floor, I'd like to start with some sort of rehabilitation of that space. And with that in mind, how do I do that in a 24-hour-a-day operation center? So this is where the questions started to come up. The existing tower infrastructure for the radios has not been anything but patched since 1979 when it was installed. There's a myriad of problems with the cabling for the radio system, and we've addressed some of that by putting in a repeater. The county graciously put in a repeater on Southside for us, and that solved a lot of problems, but it doesn't solve from the dispatch terminal to the tower. And we have issues with our base station and having to reset the base station on a regular basis. It's been I think the base station was put in when you were working for us.
technology that we're trying to fit in, and make work in that area.
Correct. Yeah. And that's been changed over the years too. It used to be an open, entryway with, you know, kind of the old-fashioned desk sergeant that was sitting behind the wall.
Yeah.
Before they blocked all that dispatch area off, there was just a half wall that existed in there for people to come in and speak to the sergeant.
So, Chris, kind of going back to your tandem project, what month are we in on that?
About 8 months in.
About 8 months in?
Time.
And what is the envelope that you're trying to take a look at?
I think I'm gonna stretch it out for a year.
Okay, so we're not that far off.
Yeah.
And you're already noticing a 25 to 27% fuel cost savings,
Which
plus
sounds-
maintenance of vehicles.
Which sounds like a lot, but we're talking about, you know, 1,000 gallons of fuel.
No,
So,
I understand. And also you've noticed anecdotally less injuries of the officers. So I guess when they're out there in the patrols, do they ever come back to the station?
they do, and that's another thing that we're seeming to, notice is that with the partner, there seems to be less downtime at the station because they're working on projects together. So if they come back with somebody, it's a joint endeavor. One person can do the incident report, the other person can roll fingerprints, hand out paperwork, take statements, whatever happens to be. So, aside from having one officer that has to sit down, take a statement from a deponent, attach that now and write up an accusatory instrument, sit down and go through and write up an incident report or case, book the person, take a photograph, do fingerprints, process them either in, for their property, put the property away, process evidence, send evidence up. It's now being split up, and they're making a determination as to, you know, we're working together as a team. So I think it's been more engaging for them, it's less boredom, less overwhelming, and they're working better together. I think the overall job satisfaction's gone up.
Sure.
So, you know, I think that's been a big win. And I've had very, very few, matter of fact, it seems to me like I'm hearing of less complaints now than I have over the last 4 years. So I think we're, you know, it may be that we keep it this way. I don't know at this point if you know, I also want to provide the best coverage that I can for the city and have people doing things elsewhere. But maybe that means I can have somebody that's in a solo car and I can say, go walk. Right? It's just a matter of getting the staff to do that.
Right. So I'm not trying to lead you up to anything, I'm just trying to understand the system that you're creating. Because within the 2025 budget, and I understand that you have a separate funding for this, but there's $140,000 for 2 patrol cars. So is that potentially an area of savings?
Yeah, I mean, we would be able to take them out of service less frequently, just with less wear and tear over time, I think would be, I mean, we already need the 2 cars. We have one that, is on it, like, I was shocked. Charlie had told me it needed an engine, but somehow Central Garage managed to change out the oil pan and filter and get the thing running again acceptably without throwing codes. But I really thought we had toasted a bearing on it. So, that's gotta come out of service and needs to be replaced.
Right.
But yeah, I would think that maybe over time, if we did that, we might be able to, I don't wanna say decrease the fleet, because we only have 5 marked patrol cars as is. We used to have 6. Like officers, cars get sick and end up in the shop, and if you don't have one in reserve, then you're sunk. So, you know, having a car sitting out back for when one goes down is important.
So you need 5 per shift or 5 for 24 hours
No.
a day, or?
You know, generally we're tearing out 2 and trying to rotate them out. But on the weekends, they'll run 4.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So we've like 4 plus a backup car then for the
Yeah, and when, you know,
max
when we have,
capacity.
when we get up to staff, I'm hoping that we'll be able to turn up,
And so the staff that you're down right now, it says in your report that you have 4. You got 3 in the academy, and so that still means there's 1 that has nobody filling the seat yet.
Correct, and then I've got 2 on workers' comp, 2 on light duty, so they're gonna actively patrol.
Is the retirement officially announced?
Well, I mean, if I needed to get a letter from him, yeah, he's gone.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, I was wondering who it is, but I think I know.
So what's included in light duty for you guys?
Well, today we had the sergeant that's working, reviewing, cameras almost the whole day to see if we could find, the identity of the suspect in the burglary case from last night. So they're doing things like something that a detective would normally have to sit and do, or we'd have to pull a dispatcher off the desk to do, we'd have them do that. They'll do, for the sergeants, they'll make assignments, they'll see that training bulletins are done. They'll do evidence runs for us, which means they'll take, you know, if we have stuff that needs to go to the lab, they'll send it to the lab.
But
It's
because they're on light
mostly
duty.
clerical administrative stuff.
Right, but because they're on light duty, they're not allowed to do a walk patrol at all, right? Because
No.
they could be
They
engaged
can't have any contact with, anybody.
in the
that-
public.
Yeah,
That
no
could lead
public
to a
contact,
potential, right?
yeah.
And how many more? It's okay. The neighborhood watch, I was curious on an explanation of the neighborhood watch. Because as you know, you and I have talked about downtown.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, ultimately, what I would like to see is I would like to see enough staff so that we can have, ward liaisons for the department. And they can manage a neighborhood watch program throughout the wards, but we're just not there yet. We don't have the proactive ability to be able to handle that. You know, we require meetings, we require neighborhood, post patrols, talking to people in neighborhoods. Yeah, I mean, I would be, happy to see some sort of a program like that with, you know, some oversight from the police department and input from us as to how they can handle it in neighborhoods.
And there was some interest, I know, in that with the Safe Homes and Neighborhood Task Force that were meeting and, are not meeting anymore, but, I know that there was some wider support from the community for efforts like that.
So is the intention to solve problems without needing to escalate to having police presence? Is that the idea?
Well, I think neighborhood watch, yeah, you know, I think if people knew their neighbors better, we'd probably have less problems overall.
100%.
You know, I think the key to that would be, educating people on when to call. We often get phone calls 2 or 3 days after an event has occurred, and that's really something that's problematic for us. You know, I'll get a phone call from, I'm sure you've all, had complaints from your constituents that they reach out to you rather than reach out to us in the moment. So, you know, that could be part of the focal point, is having the officers attend, board meetings or walk the ward and hand out pamphlets, just, you know, explaining what it is that we're gonna do. Would also entail having you as council members identify people that would be willing participants in, managing a neighborhood watch program. And, you know, we all know who those folks are. They're always out walking around in the nicer weather, right? And they're talking to people and they're engaging, right, and discussing the neighborhood. And that's really, those are the people that I want, are those neighborhood stewards that are involved in keeping an eye on things. And then hooking them up with an officer, who they have their phone number, they have their name, they have an email address, but they also know that they have to call the station directly if they want police service in the moment.
Okay.
Is that a time-intensive program?
Yeah, you know, it's gonna require me to have, somebody actually get out and walk the streets there, and I just don't have that right now. You know, again, part of the reason that I think we've had such a high attrition rate over the years is that we just are a busy police department with a high tempo, and we start adding things in there, we're adding additional stress on the officers, and that creates attrition in about 5 years when they start hitting burnout. And that's, to
capacity for it now, but how much more capacity do you need in order to do that? Do you, like, if you were fully staffed, would you be able to, or you need additional positions?
So we were granted 3 positions last year, and that's gonna put us in a position where we're gonna have a bit of a buffer zone. I don't anticipate that we're ever gonna get to like that 28 number and be able to stay there. There's no department in the city that's ever fully staffed and like at 100% all the time. They're either at 100% or a little bit more if we're able to hire in advance of planned attrition. I don't know what our capacity is gonna look like because I haven't managed 28 employees in my time as police chief, so I'm gonna have to see what that looks like. I know I can use them, I'll put them to good work.
Right.
But, but how much, available time or discretionary time I'm gonna get out of them at this point, I'm not really sure about. That's something that's gonna take some time to realize.
I had some questions about overtime.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote that some overtime basically is inevitable because of different responsibilities, but that it's, if I understood correctly, a lot of the overtime goes to things like, parades, public events, that sort of thing. Is that?
So we've managed to cut back on a lot of that. 4th of July, we've done a lot of pre-planning and setting up parking and changed the way that we, I don't want to say evacuate, but we do egress at the park. We've gone from having 2 exits to having 1 and managing that pretty well over the years. We've gone from over 2 hours to empty the park to around 45 minutes. We've gone from having 20 plus police officers working mandatory holiday to just having a few in addition to standard staff. Parades and event runs, we've tried to curtail how many of those that we're doing on surface streets. And we've changed parade routes in the way that we manage traffic on Main Street to free up officers, so we don't have officers on every corner. The problem with that, though, is I think people like to see the officers on every corner. We've done a lot when it comes to downtown problems. Back in the early 2000s, we had a massive problem with underage drinking and violence downtown. There was a lot of gang activity that was pretty well circulated in that period of time. Some big criminal drug cases that we were working on with bars that were literally taken over by a criminal element. We've done a much better job of holding bar owners accountable. The downtown scene is not what it once was as far as the students go. We don't have 1,500 kids on Water Street and 100 of them fighting, which I think is a win. So things take time to address these problems, and when we find out the root of those problems, we try to address it at the root. So overtime is certainly an issue, but we'll always have that, especially seasonally with the colleges here. In the early fall and the late spring, we see an uptick of student activity downtown. We see noise complaints go up because people open their windows. When they hear the students and the people that are just walking around on the surface streets making noise. People have more parties, so we end up upstaffing for those moments in time. There was a period of time years ago I looked at our call volume, and on average for a weekend during the spring and the fall, we would see a 400% increase in call volume from Thursday night at 8 p.m. to Saturday or Sunday morning at 4 a.m. So that was a big increase, and we would upstaff for that. We've seen less staffing in those areas, but we've also not seen a major increase in serious crimes, which is good. My biggest issue right now is just staffing, minimum shift staffing, and making sure I've got 2 people on the road.
Can I ask a follow-up question? With regard to the shift in trend from bar heavy, I think post-COVID, there's a lot more like house party. So can you talk about how OPD and code enforcement work together, or any other departments that you would support in, like, I think just safety, protocol?
So we've had to change, pretty drastically how we deal with, what we would call like narcotics trafficking or like problem, nuisance houses.
Mhm.
It used to be, we would be able to use more investigative techniques that have been taken from us, through certain, reforms. We've been working more with code enforcement in regard to the condition of some of these houses, because we found that overall, the houses that code enforcement is dealing with as problem houses oftentimes, are very tightly linked with places that we get complaints from.
Uh-huh.
So we've done, several, including the townhouse, where we've had, nuisance issues that we've taken care of that way, so we've worked very closely with codes to see that those get resolved. Code enforcement's also very helpful for us when we have large house parties, and we're able to go in and get an accounting of, fire alarms or carbon monoxide detectors that aren't working, windows covered with, tapestries or exits not clearly marked.
Mattresses.
They'll come in and they'll manage the back end of that. And that also includes, the landlords, making sure that they're having appropriate tenants and their tenants are behaving themselves. So, that's been helpful. A couple other things that we've done is that when we have, parties that we find out about that may be occurring, we'll go and knock on the door prior to the party and just introduce ourselves, and identify some of the people in the house and just say, like, listen, we don't mind that you have a party, but if you have 300 people here, we're gonna be back and you're all gonna be arrested for criminal nuisance. So that's one of the ways that we've mitigated that.
That's awesome.
But I think, right now, we've got a pretty good medium. We're not we haven't had a lot of, complaints as far as underage drinking downtown. I think the bar owners are holding fast.
Mhm.
One of the things that we've done is incorporated Department of Motor Vehicles into doing fake license enforcement. So they'll come in and they'll do an immediate, administrative suspension of somebody's license, and they have to go to a hearing. So rather than us arresting them for possession of a felony forged government document, DMV comes in and goes like, and they do civil fines,
Okay.
and that's very effective. I don't recall if they've done one this year. They may be at some point. So we've really kind of taken a maintenance approach to downtown. And I know we're never gonna get rid of underage drinking, it's not gonna happen, right, especially in a college town. Same thing with underage consumption of marijuana, it's not gonna happen. But, if we can keep the big house parties that are super disruptive and destructive to not only the house that they're in, but like the neighboring area and the neighborhood environment, we're in a pretty good place. I hope that answered your question.
It did, thank you.
I'm still thinking about overtime, because in every department, it seems like it's, if it can be avoided, that's a easy savings. But the question is if it can be avoided. So, I'm glad to hear how you've strategized to, deal with bigger events in such a way that don't, so what cases do you have people working overtime at this point?
I'm sorry, so you.
Like what situations do you have people working overtime regularly at
Well,
this
we
point?
can have, anything from major case investigations to, an officer makes an arrest, happens to be end shift, and they've got to handle that arrest. Incoming officers aren't just gonna pick up midstream from, there's gotta be continuity.
Right.
Court appearances, trainings, travel time, but most of it's really, at this point, is, minimum shift coverage by sergeants. And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to bolster the patrol staff, because the minimum shift coverage, the sergeants qualify for minimum shift coverage. I don't like the idea of a sergeant having to go out and do arrests just like a patrol officer. He should be supervising the patrol officers.
Right.
So if I can get enough patrol officers, then that supervisor wouldn't be taking minimum shift overtime. So that's part of the reason why I'm trying to kind of bolster the staff at the patrol numbers up, because the supervisors are supposed to be supervising. They're not supposed to be doing police officers' work and their work also. It's not that I don't appreciate it, they're good at what they do, it's just that I don't think that's an appropriate use of the supervisor.
So what is the minimum shift requirement?
Minimum shift requirement is 2 police officers on the road on the standard work day, and then it would be 4 from 8 p.m. To Friday night to 4 a.m. on Saturday for most nights of the school year.
And in order to meet that, and that seems like a pretty low threshold, but in order to meet that,
Well, last year I was working with 6 police officers working 42 shifts a week.
I think he's fighting right now, Mike, is that there's 2 out on workers' comp, there's
2 on
2 on light duty,
Three
there's,
in training.
and there's 4 vacancies.
well, yeah,
The
vacancies are in training.
Right, so 3 of them are out to the academy, so he
Right.
doesn't have use of them. So there's 8.
It takes a year for me to realize a police officer essentially. So just to give you a rough idea of where we're at, last year's testing was done in September. Hiring wasn't completed this year until the end of March, and they didn't go to the academy until the last week of March. They will be in the academy from March to October, and then they return to us for field training and won't be released until December. So testing started in September, and we don't get them back for full usage until December.
So
Right.
15 months.
It's a big commitment, and there's a contract that they sign that puts them in a position where if they take that training to another agency, that we recoup that money. They have to pay us back, or they're on the hook for it.
And that was what, 3 years?
I think it's 2.
And Mike, that was part of the rationale that went into the justification for 3 additional officers, was looking at the amount of overtime that the department was incurring versus, the cost of budget for those additional positions, so that they could always be trying to, think ahead, plan ahead, as he's saying.
But we are, you never know about injuries, but it looks
Right.
like we
Yes,
are
and all those
hopefully in
other-
a good place that by the time those officers are trained in December,
This
No.
is the happy me.
for next year. when-
Last year wasn't the happy me. We were really in bad shape last year. I think we're doing much better this year. We had a windfall. We had 3 officers that we were able to get through school. They've all been fantastic. And then we had a surprise come visit us starting in September of last year with another officer, Mackenzie Handel, who's worked out exceptionally well. He's a seasoned guy, so we had to do very little field training with him. So from last year, we're up 4 from where we were, but we're still out with 2 on workers' comp, 2 on light duty, which is 4 that really can't do the job and be out on the street, and a pending retirement,
Right.
and a vacancy.
My impression is that much like we were saying with the vehicles, and it takes time to realize, what we can do differently, when we change things up, is that it's going to take time to see those changes, that you're anticipating in the overtime because of the training time and catching everybody up.
And I'll give you a good example also. As you can imagine, the pandemic created a very unique condition with people, being in their houses and kind of sequestering themselves off from the world. And we had a big jump in mental health calls for service, but what we saw is drastic changes in everything else that we did. So I basically have a 3-year period where statistics are completely unreliable.
Mhm.
Makes
Right.
sense,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Yep.
And that's not that long ago. We're only talking about 3 years ago, essentially, 22, right? So we're still kind of learning what the new normal looks like, and trying to plan for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to go back to the patrol officers. So you have 4, in essence, vacancies. 3 are at the school, 1 isn't filled. And you have 4 other officers in different capacities, whether they're sergeants or whatever else, that are not able to work full-time.
Correct.
So 8 positions right now are not working in a full capacity.
Correct.
I
Out
understand that
of
correctly?
26.
Which is where your overtime is being generated.
Right, and so to Mike's point about overtime, right now I can't find it, I haven't found it at home, but I think in 23, the report that we have is that you budgeted, say, 317, but you went up to 360 something.
217, I
Or
think.
217, and it's 250 something.
This year, yeah.
And what are you anticipating for 24? Are you seeing that type of reflection going above what you budgeted?
You know, I'd have to take a look, as far as where we're at in time, but I imagine that we're pretty close to similar numbers simply because we're still 8. We're essentially in the same spot that we were last year, but we have more people working.
Judy, do you have a
Right.
sense of where those numbers are landing?
Mine, are you asking about 2024 actual overtime?
Right, because we don't have actuals yet.
Yeah, I just finished the actuals last week, and I see police department is over budget, which I'll be bringing to council next time. And I wanna say it's over $100,000. I wanna say it's about 112, if I remember the number correctly, and the fire department is also over. Just so you know, I just finished an overtime report, today, putting together 2020 through 2024, so I'm going to be giving the committee and the full council a 5-year period of overtime, and it's salaries plus the related fringe benefits, so you'll know how much money is invested, and it'll also be hours. And I've broken it out between public safety with police and fire, DPW, the 2 plants, and just everybody else is like all other, which is, and then Central Garage and OPT. So you'll be getting that report soon.
So are you anticipating 25 to look similar? Because we've talked about the probies coming out into December, getting on the road, still you're down 1 position. But what about the other 4?
So,
I don't need to know the specifics.
Don't,
But
yeah, we don't.
I
Are
don't
we
think
looking
we're
at,
gonna
by the end of
I
25,
don't
they're
think
gonna
there's gonna
be,
be a statistically significant decrease in overtime for this year, simply based on the fact that the numbers have not changed that drastically from last year. Now, one incident could cost the city tens of thousands of dollars in overtime.
right, but if I hear Ginny correctly, you went 100,000 over your overtime budget
It's not
for
gonna,
24.
I don't think it looks that bad this year.
Yeah, the only thing that I want everybody to be aware of is because of the new contracts, the overtime hourly rate is much higher. So even if the hours go down, the dollars will
So
probably.
to be conscious of the hours compared to the dollar amount and how that, because it's not just gonna be apples to apples anymore, we're gonna have to
Right.
make sure that we take that into.
It's kind of like fuel costs.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah.
fuel costs may fluctuate, but the gallons actually used, right,
Right.
is what I'm looking at. We're about 27% under last year, 25% from the year before.
Right.
So it's not the actual dollar.
Correct, because we can't anticipate what our fuel costs will be, but
I
we
think
can
that's
go
an
ahead,
equivalency.
yeah.
So I understand workers' comp, so again, I don't need to know the specifics, but are we sunsetting those 2 cases by the end of the year? Or does this look like it's gonna go into 26?
I've got one that's due to come back, I think, I'm hoping to get it back May 1st. So, that'll be one.
That's a workers' comp one.
That's, well, that one's 207C. The other one, I don't know about, and I don't know what that's gonna look like.
And then your light duties.
My light duties, waiting on MRI results, I think, from one, and the other one is due back out, full duty, I think, May 15th.
And Chris, the reason why I'm asking these specific questions is because I'm sure I'm no different than anybody else up here, is that foot patrol, literally, you know, like,
Yeah,
my
so-
sidewalk isn't the greatest,
Right,
I got potholes, and then, where's the police officers?
yeah.
That literally is about those orders.
No, I know, I don't know if I mentioned it in that, but I've spoken with the sergeants this year, we've already started strategizing, basically hotspot policing for problem areas, including like Huntington Park area,
Right.
which it has a tendency to have congregants that, violate the rules of the park. They
Right.
have open containers, they're smoking cigarettes, and they shouldn't be doing that, same thing with Moe's Plaza. Yeah, we're gonna be doing some target enforcement downtown, you'll see officers more frequently this year than last, but we'll also have more officers on the street.
looking at the 26 budget, would it, do you think you'd be able to decrease enough, overtime enough if we, like, approved an additional officer that, like, that would pay for itself?
That I don't know. I don't know. I would like to say yes. You know, I came from most of my career where we had 28 staff and we would float somewhere around 25 with vacancies, and every year we would have a consistent hiring cycle. But around 2008, we had a mass exodus, a bit of a hiccup there between 2008 and 2012. We had hired, I want to say 13 staff. I'd have to look at exactly who's going to go and when. But I've got one that's eligible this year, 2 that are eligible next year. The following year, I think I've got at least 1, and I think we have like 4. Right, so we have the capacity, even in the next 5 years, losing another 10 people. So, you know, I don't know exactly what that's gonna look like as far as attrition goes. I don't think, that's gonna reveal itself this month. I can look a little bit more closely at the numbers that we have. That's another issue that I'm having, is my report management system is not really user-friendly. We're trying to figure out how to replace that. For something that gives us a better at-a-glance statistical review of officer activity, as well as other, even just word searches, to be able to isolate specifics. And I can't even search people by phone number right now.
Can I just tag in Ginny? Is that something that Tyler Technology has the capability to do?
It is, but Tyler's very expensive, and I've been in talks with the county as to whether or not we might be able to manage some. There's another topic of conversation for tomorrow.
Okay.
I don't know what that's gonna look like. City grant funding, especially a city of our size, is a lot more prohibitive than cities that are in other areas that would be under like a GIVE initiative grant or some other federally approved grant funding.
Okay.
Most of the grants for cities of our size come directly through the county,
Okay.
and it would be managed through the county.
Just to make it clear, Katie, the Tyler Technology that you approved last week is a different module.
I know that.
There's a separate one just for law enforcement.
I know that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because, you know, we had talked about eventually like
Yeah.
moving all of, you know, all of our systems over to that, so I wanted to know about it.
Yeah, and I think that they've been pretty receptive at the county level as to, yeah, I think it'd be good for everybody, simply because the zone, which would be Zone 6, which would include Broome, Delaware, Shenango, Tioga, Otsego, Delaware. 6 counties.
I was only five.
I'm missing one.
Shenango?
Shenango.
Shenango,
Yeah,
you
I
said.
think I said Shenango.
Right.
Anyway, that zone, our zone academies is Broome County.
Okay.
Broome County is on Tyler.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Delaware County's on Tyler. If we got on Tyler, it would be able to fuse a lot of that information and give that to the Crime Analysis Center. The Crime Analysis Center would then have a broader ability.
Oh, cool. Like
Yeah.
regional
Yeah,
data.
that's, okay.
Correct, yeah.
So
Yeah, that's awesome.
it sounds like it puts things together, like patches together these different systems to strengthen, you know,
My goal was
resources you have.
originally to try to get like a 3-county consortium on the same,
Mhm.
up in this area, so
Cool.
Shenango, I think, went in a different direction.
Okay,
Oswego's still receptive, Delaware's on it.
okay.
I don't know where Tioga stands, but Broome is on it, and that's our biggest, information draw. I mean, we get a lot of people that come up from Binghamton area, Broome County area, up in this way. So, you know, having the ability to say, oh, look, it's not gonna give us everything, it just gives us permission-based access. So if we see something that's in there, we say, okay, we wanna focus on this as an investigative measure, we would be able to reach out to an investigator down there, kind of join forces, you know, the long arm of the law.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so related to staffing, there's one question about community volunteers. And I'm just thinking, are there things that your officers do that civilians could do? I'm thinking especially like like say 4th of July directing traffic, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I think we had DPW help us out last year with that, stuff. As far as civilian volunteers, I don't know if we had.
Or other city staff too.
Pool, I mean, I would love to see a police auxiliary here, but again, that's we've had a police auxiliary in the past, mostly after, World War II, when they had, national defense activation. They had a lot of, military-age males from, us to go off to fight, and they backfilled that with an auxiliary force for the city. How could that be implemented? I don't know. I know that there's other cities that have police auxiliaries. I mean, specifically, New York City Police Department's got a large, robust police auxiliary. Suffolk County, Nassau County, but it takes people to be able to do that, and a certain amount of resources, like, retired police cars and uniforms, and who's gonna pay for that, and who's gonna administer it, and who's gonna supervise it. I think it would be an interesting way for people that wanted to always get into law enforcement to maybe get a taste and be part of something that's a little bit bigger than themselves and give back to the community. But again, it's gonna require administrative effort.
Right. Short of something like a police auxiliary, I mean, that would be great, but how did it work with coordinating with DPW, and is that a model that we can use?
We work really well with all the agencies within the city. I mean, this is, the best that I've ever seen it run as far as across, different departments. We have much more open communication. I speak with Chris Iacobucci and, Gene Russell and the fire chief and Charlie Hefner, and, I mean, I think the only people that we really don't talk to very much are, water and sewer treatment. But, they're kind of siloed in their own little spot. But we call in a lot of the water main breaks that we have for the city and other issues that we have, so we'll sit around and wait for them to show up and kind of get an assessment of what they need to do.
I'm asking because I'm looking for places that we can, like Katie said earlier, like thinking outside the box of like,
Yeah.
but it seems like you've already done a good job finding all those things.
No, I've been at this 27 years, so, this is 28 if you include my time, but it'll be 28 years in July for the fire department. So, Chief Barnes, way back when, was like, always look for another avenue if you gotta get a job done, so. I've had a lot of good teachers over the years, including Glenn Carson, who was a captain that I worked for when I was a coalman. Well, he was a firefighter at that time.
So, one of the things that we talked about, this is on topic, was, with regard to events. This was in service of the conversation around charging public safety fees to organizations who are holding events in the park, or parades, or things like that. One of the discussions was, can we put together a list of required criteria based on event characteristics that we say to event organizers, like, basically, these are the volunteer positions, these are the things, like, you need people at every intersection in the park directing traffic. We'll provide the traffic barricades, but you have to have someone put them out. And then that would, basically, you either need to provide volunteers to do that, these safety measures, or we'll do it and we're going to charge you. But that it's necessary. And then there would be just sort of an oversight, requirement where somebody would have to go down and make sure that this stuff was actually happening, but it'd be one person instead of like several officers. So I just wanted to kind of jump on what Mike was saying in terms of, do you see any value in developing some sort of protocol for events organizers to follow that would also then generate like a billing structure with regard to the type of service that we would provide? And I know that, but I know I'm reading Jenny's mind right now, that we often provide these services in kind because they provide community benefits. So they can't always be quantified, they can't always be billed, but that aside, the question stands.
Well, I think our biggest, we've done a lot of that with the road races. Organizations like the YMCA are great about putting road guards out and putting out cones and making sure that the roads have someone there necessarily hit the mass gathering permit threshold for the Fourth of July for any one given point in time for that day, but we certainly do, for like the fireworks. So it's kind of people coming and going all day long, right, until that one moment, and then we have to get everybody out of the park,
Uh-huh.
right? That's tough when you have volunteers, because people can be inherently difficult, especially when it comes to directing traffic. And having a uniformed police officer there is really key. They have the authority to be able to move people or remove people, if needed. So, and that's our most labor-intensive period of time of the year, is that closing of the park.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, obviously, with any large gathering like that, you want to have a police presence for deterrent factor also. So, we want to be visible, and I think that reduces some stress on the threat level.
Yeah, okay.
Right,
Thank you.
overall,
Thank you for
looking at
looking
your
at
overtime budget, that, you broke the prices down for us, that's like maybe a $10,000 day.
And it's probably more than that.
It's probably more than that.
It's probably 20, it's probably closer to 20.
Wow.
For that event, you're saying? or-
For July 4th?
Yeah. Wow, okay.
Okay, so,
Well, I'm wondering, so volunteers is what I was asking about before, would be cost effective to hire a security company or something like that?
I think that for the 4th of July, what you'd be doing is augmenting the staffing that's there and freeing up officers to do other things aside from looking for issues. It would be more eyes in the park, but I don't know how comfortable I would feel with decreasing the staffing as it stands. We've gotten to be we keep it pretty lean as a matter of course. Much leaner than it used to be. It used to be an all hands on deck, no leave approved, and now if you're not working that day, you get the day off, and we don't want to see you, unless you're coming in with your family or whatever.
right, but instead of a either or, Katie's suggestion and Mike's suggestion is kind of something, isn't that something that you could schedule in? Say, start
Yeah.
participating in that neighborhood watch, volunteers, whatever you're gonna
It
call
could
it,
be,
in the next 2 to 3 years.
Leading up to the 4th of July.
Start training some people that are interested in that type of position.
And that would be a discussion to have also with hometown as far as, what they have the capacity to be able to do.
And I guess, I know that you've always been an outside the box kind of thinker, but I do like Katie's suggestion about looking at a third party, because 40 hours for one individual, one potential hire, that's a lot of time.
And we have,
For the
but we have
background
to
checks.
remember that, like we hired somebody from Buffalo. Buffalo Police Department or some other agency is gonna cost an exorbitant amount of money to go and do that on a contract basis. So to go and do neighbor visits, ends up being put on the backs of the officers that are working here.
Right.
And then you're talking, travel time there and back.
But there might be the possibility of a hybrid system.
We use one now with the Guardian Alliance, because it used to be we would do all the paperwork and all the organization of the paperwork ourselves, and we'd have a packet that was this thick per officer, and we'd have to touch every single piece of that, and we've pushed a lot of that back to the candidate themselves through filling out the personal history questionnaire and the references and the contacts with their phone numbers, email addresses, and we use Guardian. They actually, once they put in all the addresses that they live at, Guardian actually sends out all the law enforcement contact letters that we used to have to type and send out to each specific one. They do that automatically for us. So we haven't embraced that third-party model, and it is a hybrid, and it saved us a considerable amount of time, but it's not gonna save us all the time.
Right.
So like I said, it saved us between, 10 and 20 hours of actual work.
For me, the last question I have is, what's the largest amount that you've removed from your budget?
Probably year one. I came in with the leanest budget I think we had in 12 years. But a lot of that's, contractual obligations too, so when you're negotiating salaries and you look at overtime, that all goes up commensurate to what their salaries are. And there's like I said, a
the 2024 budget included 3 full-time dispatchers, 2025 has 2. It included 2024 included 2 part-time civilian dispatchers, 2025 included 1. But in exchange, we added the 3 officers. So it was, I think, in recent history, it's been the decrease in dispatch cost.
What is that monetary amount?
Ooh, that
That was the question.
oh, the monetary, that I could look up and email you. I don't have it right with me.
I was just asking the department head. I mean, I'm assuming the financial director asks each department head every single year, we need to cut. And so I'm curious of what's the largest amount in your interim as police chief that you've had to cut?
Well, I walked into a police department that was cut considerably. And that is my challenge, is trying to figure out how I can put us into an operational standpoint and be proactive, because foot patrols are proactive, right? So that has been my primary focus, is putting us into a position where we can do proactive work. It's not to say that we haven't been all along, it's just how much discretionary time does an officer have during the day? And I believe when I came to you with the request for more staff, we're way over 70% accounted for time. That was because we were at 6 police officers, and what happens then is they're working themselves literally to breaking point and don't want to work here anymore. So that's been the challenge, is trying to figure out how it is that we can most efficiently police the city for the least amount of money at the lowest staffing levels. And when I came to you last year, we were at the we weren't tied for the lowest, we were at the lowest per capita staffing of any accredited police agency in a city in New York State. So, that's been the challenge. I walked into this at a deficit. And while I would love to say I can cut more,
I'm not asking to cut more. I'm just asking what you've cut, how much.
I can't give you a monetary amount on that. I think it was, the first year I didn't ask for anything to additional. And then we started with some other things. I mean, the radio project, we managed to get the county to pick up the lion's share of that. I think we're talking about $300,000 of money that didn't come from the city coffers. So that would be my #1 most significant achievement as far as saving money for the city. Would be working collaboratively with the county to not only give us a dispatch position, but to help shore up our very aging radio system. But that's not really a savings or a cut of the budget. It's just a creative way for us to obtain more mobility.
Thanks. And we're getting close to 7:30, so we should wrap up soon. Do you have a last question? That's what I was gonna ask.
2 last questions.
Okay.
Just looking at the staffing, in the 24 budget, there was a 80% time ordinance inspector animal control. And that's listed 0 for 2025. Do you not have someone doing that? Or,
It's been moved to code enforcement.
oh, okay. Got it. So still, the city's still paying, okay. Go, if anyone has another question. I have to
Did you-
find the other one I was
Did you
gonna.
have
No,
others?
I'm all set.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have 2 things that I can say.
Yeah, I think Mike needs a moment, so go.
I just,
I just want to remind the committee, when you were talking about the public safety building, back, I want to say 2019, 2020, we created a building reserve to start it, and $150,000 was put in it, I believe, at the time, with the goal of recabling the public safety building. We have not done that yet, but we created that reserve, I want to say it was around 2020, in anticipation of knowing that the cabling at the public safety building needs to be upgraded. And so I just wanted to remind the committee of
Yeah,
that reserve that
yep.
we still have on hand. But Greg has said he doesn't want to invest in the cabling until we figure out what's going to actually happen with the
Yeah, I
building.
was gonna say, it sounds like we're waiting for the next steps with that assessment, so that we, okay. Thank you.
so Jim, last question for you was, I mean, it seems like what you said, that losing people at the 5-year point, like, how can we keep officers longer? I mean, the tandem patrol is one thing, not having people burn out because you're understaffed is another. What are there things that we can do?
Well, you know, I think the biggest thing is making sure that we have, that we have the staff. So losing them in the first 5 years is an issue, but we're also losing them at the end. So the sergeant that's leaving has got 17 years and he brought back his military time, and he's leaving. The next sergeant that's leaving is buying back his military time, and he's leaving. So there's already an advanced investment in them separated from service. I would love to see us be able to hold them longer. There are many police agencies in the state as well as the city of Oneonta that invest in a 384E retirement system, like the fire department, which incentivizes them staying for an additional percentage after they're 20. So you're retaining, and you know, now we have officers that are in much better physical condition overall than they were 30 years ago. I think healthcare is better. I think awareness of officers' mental health and physical well-being is better. So they can stay serviceable longer. So how could we retain those staff instead of seeing them leave through attrition would be the next order of business, I think. Where we stand right now, I made it very clear to this council that I'm big on officer wellness, peer counseling, peer support, making sure that they feel supported, that they're valued as far as their opinion. My door is open for every officer in my agency, from the newest police hire to the most senior staff member that I've got. I don't shy away from anybody. I'm pretty easily accessible. And I think that my staff knows that I support the mission that we have. We're all very mission focused. That all helps in retaining staff. What doesn't help is the workload. And trying to keep that varied in the department where we have so few members. I don't have special assignments. It's not like I've got a crime scene investigations unit. I don't have a canine unit. I don't have places for people to go that might give them a break from the work that they're doing on a day-to-day. So having the ability to be proactive and hand out special assignments to people is a big one, but I can't do special assignments unless I have the staff. So twofold really there with, or threefold, retaining the senior staff longer, making sure that we have enough staff to do the work, and then keeping the sergeants out of the actual day-to-day police work of the department would put us in a very good position going forward. And that's what I've been trying to do since I was taken on as chief here.
Thanks very much. I appreciate your time. You got one more follow-up?
So,
All right.
Ginny, you said you completed the actuals for 24 last week, and you're going to be sending the council members that report. And this year, are you going to be breaking it down per department?
Well, I was picking it by area. So for example, for DPW, I was just gonna add all DPW together, unless you want it by parks and.
No, I'd like to see it as in the DPW as a department as a whole, because I'm curious in the police department, given all his vacancies, and even though he might have went over his overtime budget by 100,000, if he had 4 vacancies, I think you budgeted about 120,000 per officer. That means he should be to the plus side. There should have been a savings to the cities, I guess what I'm getting at.
I wanna, if I remember the number correctly, and I'm sorry if I'm not quoting it correctly, I think his overtime went over by between 112 and 125,000. But he's got enough in his .1 from his vacancies to cover that.
That's what I
Yeah,
just said.
so the transfer is just gonna be from his .1 to the overtime code.
Right.
That's a little different for the fire department,
Right,
but
but with the-
I'll be bringing that.
Right, but with the police department, his overall budget, if it was 5.8 million, whatever it was, he potentially didn't actually go over his
Correct,
budget.
because of the vacancies, he also has savings in health insurance and in retirement and in FICA. So as a department as a whole, he has a surplus.
Yeah, so I'm curious of what that number was.
I can do that.
And I see for next month, for May, we're going to be words yet, so.
One of the things that the fire chief and I speak about quite frequently, when we discuss proactive measures to reduce workload on staff, is a distinct lack of follow-up. We just don't have the ability to do a lot of follow-up. So if we make an arrest on a domestic dispute, the officers aren't calling the victim the next day saying like, hey, did you call the victim services, that kind of thing? And we may end up with, somebody going back to that location. Or for somebody that's suffering from mental health issues, we don't typically follow up with them. The follow-up there would be like a routine call for service. So, and looking at this, community paramedicine program, the fire chief has been discussing. I last year was gonna try to send people off to crisis intervention training, so we would have some members trained up in crisis intervention. That, coupled with a city social worker, may put us in a position where we can have wraparound services and have somebody that would reach out directly to a victim, to somebody that's suffering